Hello everyone, Ace here, and today, well, I'm just going to have to go ahead and say it. Short Fat Otaku is completely right about the topic of hollow representation. Now, I know I'm a little bit late to the scene on this particular response video, given that it's now almost 2 weeks since Dev uploaded his hollow representation video. However, I do believe that a response is still necessary. That said, for those who haven't seen the video that I'm responding to, Short Fat Otaku goes into detail explaining how the far left ends up making things worse for the so-called diversity groups that they claim to champion. And it's towards the very end of that video when Dev says something that is, in my opinion, the absolute highlight of the whole video.
But this isn't the 1950s. Nobody's out there anymore saying that women can't earn their own money, or disabled people can't contribute to society, or gay people have to be weird, pedo, AIDS-spreading degenerates, or black people are too dumb for school. Nowadays, people can do whatever they want. Hey, wait a minute. There are people saying all that shit. It's the left. They think disabled people can't contribute. It's why they want them to be paid for life, rather than letting disabled people contribute in their own way and have some dignity by standing on their own 2 feet. They think LGBT people are weird degenerates, and that being a weird degenerate is a core component of being queer. And if you're gay or trans but you're not a weird degenerate, then you're a traitor to the cause. They think that black people are too dumb for school. That's why they've implemented diversity quotas. This is what representation is in the modern era. It's just bigotry.
So yes, Short Fat Otaku is, in my opinion, completely correct when he says that, quote, representation, unquote, in the modern era is just bigotry. And I don't see how you can argue against that position when the far leftists trying to push said, quote, representation, unquote, keep arguing things like claiming that black people are all orcs from D&D, or that Jewish people are all Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy. And yes, these are actual positions held by far leftists. So yes, Short Fat Otaku is, in my opinion, completely correct about that. Though he doesn't seem to explain why far leftists tend to come to that conclusion. And this is the real reason why I'm making this response, because I believe I have an answer. As far as I'm concerned, there appears to be 2 main reasons why Marxists tend to be massive bigots. Of these, the first reason, and the one I'm going to be focusing on mostly for this video, comes directly from critical race theory, and is one of the 5 basic tenets of critical race theory. Namely, the tenet that race is a social construct, which is to say the claim that race is a product of social thought and is not connected to biological reality. In other words, race is whatever society decides to define it as. You may now be wondering, how exactly does arguing that race is a social construct and thus not actually real lead to some very severe forms of bigotry, or at least extreme forms of bigotry on the part of the far left? Well, for that, let's have a quick look at the Merriam-Webster definition of stereotype, which in entry 2 of 2, part 2 says, quote, something conforming to a fixed or general pattern, especially a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group and that represents an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. Now here's why I bring this definition up. By arguing that race is a social construct and thus defined by social thought, the far leftists are actively making the argument that stereotypes are not only completely true, but that they are part of the very definition of what exactly constitutes a race. In other words, to the far left, a white person who does not like mayonnaise is literally seen as less of a white person because they do not like mayonnaise. So apparently the far left think we are unironically living in the world of Undercover Brother, where stereotypes are all 100% true. The thing is that Undercover Brother was a comedy meant to show the absurdity of bigotry in general, by showing how absurd such a world would be. But it gets even worse, because you have to remember that this is all being interpreted through the warped lens that the individuals of the far left use to see reality with. Thus, as far as the critical race theorists are concerned, it's not even a case of what are actual stereotypes still in existence within the US, it's what the critical race theorists think are actual stereotypes still in existence within the US. So yes, ultimately arguing that race is a social construct has a bad habit of perpetuating racism rather than actually countering it. Instead, if you want to actually argue against racism, you should do so using an individualistic argument, such as saying that race isn't actually relevant, and that a person should be judged on their own personal merits as an individual. That, however, brings me to the second factor that tends to make Marxists into massive bigots, that being the complete rejection of individualism in favor of an exclusively collectivist worldview. I'm not going to go too much into detail over this myself, because Short Fat Otaku has covered it repeatedly through his readings of Karl Marx's On the Jewish Question. I will, however, leave a link to one of his videos where he goes over the particular quote in question. However, the shorthand notes for those curious is that Karl Marx argues that individualism is a tool for the bourgeoisie, and something that has to be torn down. It's to such an extreme degree that, by the way, he even rejects concepts such as individual consent. And that's something I might actually do a follow-up video on itself, but getting back to the topic at hand, however, the reason I bring this up is that by rejecting individualism in favor of a collectivist worldview, Marxists have to view people as part of groups rather than as individuals. And with this in mind, it is ideologically impossible for a Marxist to avoid being a racist, because the mechanism of not being a racist requires one to view the world through an individualist lens, which a Marxist by definition must reject in order to be a Marxist. So yes, those are, in my opinion, the two reasons why far leftists tend to be massive bigots. However, I also suspect that the first reason I brought up has directly led to the obsession that many far leftists seem to have when it comes to trans issues. As by arguing that things such as race and gender are a social construct, the SJWs have defined themselves to be transphobic. Allow me to explain. The big question that far leftists simply refuse to answer these days is simply, what is a woman? Well, the far leftists believe that woman being a gender is just a social construct. However, by making that argument, the far leftists are also effectively saying that only people who actively present enough stereotypes associated with women can actually be called women. In other words, only trans women who actually can pass as women are defined as women by the far leftists' own standards, because they have relegated genders to being a social construct. In other words, not all trans women are actually women by the far leftists' own definition. And this, according to the standards of social justice, makes social justice as an ideology transphobic. And the only way that SJWs can actually rectify this issue is by completely redefining the stereotypes associated with women, thus changing what exactly a woman is and is not. This also completely redefines gender as to being whatever a person wishes their gender to be. The problem here is that then this completely legitimizes parody genders, such as attack helicopters. So the far left have found themselves in the catch-22 position of both needing gender to be completely non-definable so people can just simply identify as whatever they want, whilst at the same time needing some definitions in place to prevent people from making jokes. This is ultimately a problem that simply cannot be reconciled, and so the far left have talked themselves into a no-win situation here. At the same time, however, it is something that they must reconcile, or else they're stuck with being massive transphobes by their own definitions, which completely delegitimizes their entire ideology. And in my opinion, this is ultimately such a blatant problem that even far leftists cannot choose to ignore it, and have thus been utterly obsessed with trying to resolve the unresolvable. So I know we've covered a fair bit of ground, however, I do think it is a good time to go ahead and call the video. So I'll end by saying that I will of course be providing links in the description below, so you can check out the sources that I've used if you should so desire. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.